Welcome to Heartfelt Conversations, where we talk about discussions around human trafficking and how we can prevent people from being trafficked, and also the support HAART gives alongside many other discussions. Today, we are here with two of my colleagues. I am very happy, ladies, that you've joined me. They are both spectacular. All of us have specs. So I'll just call them my spectacular ladies who are joining me today as we discuss a very crucial topic. But before we jump into it, and I don't talk too much alone, I would like them to introduce themselves. So who is ready to start? Do we start with the letters of your alphabet? So that would be you.
Yes.
Because your name comes before hers.
Okay. Hello, my name is Miriam Mangoka. I head the prevention department at HAART Kenya. It's a pleasure to be here.
Welcome, welcome. I don't bite, so just husa to go to sawa. And to my right.
Yeah, my name is Winnie Akinyi. I work at HAART Kenya Protection Department, Outreach Care Manager.
Now, you know, when we are talking like that, you're saying really nice names, prevention, protection. Someone is like, what are you talking about? So maybe, Miriam, we can start with you. What does prevention work entail so that then they can understand?
Okay. So basically, the prevention department focuses on enhancing community resilience when it comes to human trafficking. So our main goal is preventing human trafficking through creating awareness in the community, but also running empowerment programs. So we do have an empowerment program for young people, as well as an empowerment program for children. So we are looking into enhancing capacities of the community in general when it comes to protecting themselves from becoming victims of trafficking, as well as alerting them the risks of trafficking and how they can better support victims within their vicinity or within their communities.
Yeah, great stuff. And Winnie, what does protection work entail here at HAART Kenya?
Yeah, so protection work entails supporting survivors within during their integration journey and ensuring they have enough coping mechanism and to avoid re-trafficking. So it varies with the needs of survivors, and also offering shelter. So you give them a safe space for them to recover. Therefore, they'll no longer be victims of trafficking, rather survivors.
Okay, great stuff. So the best thing about this HAART podcast is that we will be able to discuss more about like your prevention work. We delve into that and to see what do you mean by we have a youth program, we have a shelter. Those are things that guys will be talking about in the future. But for today, in the month of July, that's the 30th of July, we have the World Day Against Trafficking in Persons. That's commemorated around the world, where we recognize and create awareness about human trafficking. This year's theme is Leave No Child Behind in the Fight Against Human Trafficking. And that's why we are here today to discuss how then does child trafficking manifest itself? How can people support themselves, support children rather, who have been trafficked? And how can we create awareness to children, yeah? So with that brief intro, the Leave No Child Behind, having done your research, what inspired the whole discussion around Leave No Child Behind?
So basically, the theme of Leave No Child Behind was crafted by UNODC. And this was designed around the Global Trafficking in Persons report of both 2022 and 2023, where we've seen the number of reported victims of trafficking are children, especially in sub-Saharan Africa and North Africa. So then that raises the need to increase protection when it comes to children, as well as increase awareness on the vulnerability factors for children when it comes to trafficking. Yeah.
And now that we're talking about trafficking, Winnie, in a nutshell, what is then child trafficking for someone who's like, that sounds like a very big word. You know, many of us people think, even I myself, before I joined HAART and understood what human trafficking and child trafficking entails, I was stuck on the format of movies, you know, where it's like a canter and then you're blindfolded, thrown in a bus. I mean, there's still that aspect, but how does child trafficking and what is it manifest itself here in Kenya?
Yeah, so child trafficking is basically exploitation of children, and it comes in various forms. So we have children exploited in labor, where they work in construction sites. We have those ones in agricultural sector, working in mirror farms. We have people harvesting carrots somewhere in Kenya. And we also have domestic workers, somebody else employing a child to go and work in their households. So child trafficking differs from place to other, and the worst forms of trafficking include also sexual exploitation, children being enslaved in brothels and working as sex workers. So this is a brief of the kind of exploitation that's happening currently in Kenya in regards to child trafficking.
And Miriam, when it comes to, let's say a child has been brought, and it's like we're not clear about the whether this child has been trafficked. What are usually like the steps that we use? I think the act means purpose step that you can describe on how to identify that this is actually a child of trafficking.
Okay. So basically, we use the definition of the Palermo Protocol when it comes to identifying cases of human trafficking. So we have 3 stages or 3 steps. That is activity, means, and purpose. So that one is what we use for adult victims. But for children, we use activity and purpose, simply because means requires a certain degree of consent, and children are not able to give consent. So when we talk about activity, we are looking at children who have been recruited, who have been transported, who have been transferred, who have been harbored, somebody received them. And then we're also looking into now the purpose. Why is trafficking happening? Why is this child being trafficked? So we are having children who are trafficked for forced labor. We are having children who are trafficked for forced begging, as well as those who are engaged in sexual exploitation. Then we are also looking at children who are taken into forms of criminal agencies, children who are working in armed conflict, child soldiers, terrorist groups, children who are involved in drug trafficking. We are also having children who are encompassed in prostitution or production of child pornographic materials. So there are different forms of exploitation, but one, we need to identify if this child was even abducted, if they were kidnapped, and then at the end goal, what type of exploitation did this child experience? So if you receive a child who's a victim of trafficking, they have to have those 2 particular components, the activity and the purpose. If they do not fit that case, it still doesn't mean that they do not need assistance. It means that they've experienced a violation of their rights, a different form of child abuse that is not necessarily child trafficking.
Now, there have been many stories like locally here in Kenya where you see someone has stolen a child, they want to sell them for 750,000, others they want to sell them for 50,000, and these cases have been highlighted in the media. So do these fall under child trafficking? And if, let's say I'm the one watching at home and I see such a case or I hear of such a case, what would you advise that person who's watching?
So we have children being sold, and for a human, it's supposed to be a good to be sold. So it is trafficking. The purpose is usually not very clear because they're intercepted before they get to the market. But also you have in orphanages, children being taken to orphanages, and then you have illegal adoption taking place. And at the end of the day, the children are abused. So as a person who's witnessing these things, our role is really to report it to the nearest police station and the children's office, or even the Director of Criminal Investigation, the DCI, to investigate the matter further and then to take the necessary actions.
Great. So we've already discussed like some forms of child trafficking. So what are some of the push and pull factors? And maybe if you have an example of a story that you've had that can describe a bit more.
So when we talk about push factors, these are factors within the child's family or environment that put them at a high risk of being trafficked. So we are looking at poverty, both at home and at the community. We find situations where parents find it easier to let their children go and work in search of basic needs to be able to support themselves or to even support their family. Then we also have factors such as family dysfunctions, when families separate, or when parents separate, or when children even run away from home, which means they do not have a guardian or they do not have an adult who is in charge of protecting them. So they are at a high risk of being trafficked. We are also looking at the age of the child. Traffickers tend to target different ages depending on the type of exploitation, but a younger child is at a higher risk of being duped or being lied to or being lured. Then we are also looking at instability especially if children are in a situation where the community has war or conflict, where children are forced to move when they are migrating. So you find the instances where children are moving on their own, or they're separated from their families, they're moving along with other children. So migration also puts them at a risk, especially if there's no one to protect them. Then we are also looking at specific individual factors. So we have even the gender, where we have girls who are at a high risk of being trafficked. Then even children with disabilities who are also at a risk of being trafficked, especially, for example, in Nairobi, where we are having children who are being recruited from as far as Tanzania, who are disabled children who are being recruited to come and beg in the streets of Nairobi. And that also is now a conversation for push factors. What is making the streets of Nairobi attractive for children who have disabilities to come and beg? We're looking at the goodwill of people just wanting to help vulnerable children. But we are also looking at what is the rate of prosecuting people who have trafficked children. So if there are gaps in the system, the criminal justice system, it means the traffickers still remain in the community, continue doing whatever it is that they are doing. Then we're also looking at demand for cheap labor, where we are having preference of adults wanting to employ children because of the pay factor, wanting to pay children less, or wanting to control children. So that also becomes a pull factor when it comes to Nairobi. We're also looking at urbanization, where the economic disparity between the rural community and the urban community is facilitating migration. So as much as families are moving from rural areas to urban areas, they also move with children. Then urban areas also provide an environment where children are engaged in earning in the means of production, or working in different forms of income generating activities. So those are the push and the pull factors.
Yeah. Some of the examples you've given, I'm sure many of us can relate to them, especially seeing like young girls being brought as domestic workers to work in their houses. So in the event that from the protection side we receive children who need support, they were in a trafficking situation, what are some of those services that HAART offers, and why have they been designed like that?
So one of the services that is quite vital is shelter support. So HAART has a shelter that accommodates women and girls, but for children we have between the ages of 7 to 17 who are victims of trafficking. We only offer support to female within our shelter, but does not mean we cannot support male survivors. So we also work with other shelters that takes the male victims, then we follow up with our services. We also have psychosocial support, making sure they access therapy. And for those ones who need medication, they can go and get a psychiatric review and medication offered. For a child to ensure their basic rights are met, they need to access education and information. So we offer tuition fees and education materials for them to continue with their learning. And before we take them back to society, because the government currently is advocating for children not to be in institutions but within the communities, we also talk to the family, prepare them mentally and psychologically to take care of these children, but also economically, because some of the reasons that, as my colleague had mentioned earlier, is poverty. So if we do not fix the economic state of the family, the child is more likely to be trafficked and be abused. So we make sure if it's a business, the economic status is fixed before we take the child back home. Therefore, the child can be safely reintegrated in the family.
Yeah, okay. And for prevention work, what role does HAART play in terms of creating awareness about child trafficking, child labor to children in the community?
First is being able to build the capacities of first responders. So we are looking at children officers, we are looking at magistrates, we are looking at law enforcement agencies like the police, religious leaders, healthcare workers, community child protection volunteers, teachers. So we are looking at adults who are at a position in the community to provide services, especially if there's a case of trafficking. So empowering them to be able to identify cases of trafficking and also where do they refer the cases to. Then we are also targeting the parents as well through our community workshops, looking into different things that they can put or different measures that they can put within their household to protect children from becoming victims of trafficking. Then we're also looking at children themselves. So being able to run child trafficking awareness sessions throughout the prevention counties that we do, as well as being able to communicate to children about their rights. How do they flag a case of child trafficking? Where do they report? Who is a safe adult? And then how do they also create awareness to their peers? Then we also run a child empowerment program, the Child Safeguarding Clubs, which now focuses on child participation and child advocacy. So it's a more long-term solution when it comes to providing opportunities for children to have decision-making power when it comes to issues that concern them, having them drive the conversation, having them raise issues and talk about, this is my experience as a child, and providing platforms for them to be able to talk about what they feel can be done or what they feel has not been done properly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. So maybe Winnie, you've talked also about how we have a shelter that supports children. Maybe you can share with us a group of children that you've supported or HAART has supported and even the outcomes. Yeah.
And so I think one of the largest groups we supported are about 24 girls from Uganda, the Karamoja community, who were trafficked to Kenya for domestic work. And some of them ended up being sexually abused by the employers during their working period. So I think that was one of the biggest cases that we've handled, but we also worked with children from the neighboring country who were brought to Kenya for forced begging. And that case actually was successful. The person was sentenced to 30 years in jail, and the children were all reintegrated back to the communities.
And what are some of the extreme cases you've had in terms of the children coming? Do they have medical conditions and stuff?
I think some of the common trends we're seeing currently is that majority of the victims that we're getting, especially girls, are pregnant. And most of them have also issues with the spinal cords as young as 12 to 11 years old. So the kind of work that these children are exposed to, how does that affect their physical and mental well-being? And are they able to reintegrate and be productive members of society? So those are just a few challenges that we've noticed from the cases that we've handled.
Yeah. And for Miriam, you talked about like awareness workshops and all those things. So do you have like an example of an activity that you've done recently in terms of empowering children with the skills, knowledge, and how they express themselves in their understanding of child trafficking?
So on 12th June, we had an activity that focused on children. It was dubbed the Art to End Child Labor. And this is the activity that focused on empowering children to use art as a medium of advocacy. So we were bringing together children from 22 schools where we ran the child safeguarding clubs in Nairobi. So this is both primary and secondary schools. So we had over 400 children. And our main goal was to provide proper professional facilitators who are able to guide children, one, in understanding child labor, as well as child trafficking, and two, in using the different mediums of art that we had, which was poetry, which was dancing, theater, we were having painting, we were having murals. So we were looking into how do we better equip children to express themselves in mediums that are more interactive and also mediums that children like. So from there, we were able to collect different views of children just from whatever it is they were expressing. And we now look into transitioning that into conversations with different stakeholders, with teachers, with parents, with agencies that work with children, with other NGOs. And why we are doing this is we've seen an increase in child labor cases. Looking at the pandemic that was happening, so we've seen an increase in cases of child labor in the country, but also Africa as well. So this is part of working towards the Durban call to action when we are looking into reducing the cases of child labor in Africa. Yes.
Great stuff, great stuff. Yeah, so for Winnie, Miriam has alluded to it about working with different partners. Why is there a need for organizations to work with different stakeholders? What is the importance of partnership in the fight against child trafficking?
So organizations do not have the adequate resources and also capacity to offer all services. Therefore, you need to work with other people. So another protection department to work closely with the children's officers because it's their mandate to make sure all the rights and all the children in the country are protected. And for access to justice, whatever happens to them is a crime. So you equally work with the police and also the criminal justice sector. That's working with the judiciary, you're looking at the prosecutors to make sure justice is served to these children and their families.
Great stuff. Do you have anyone to add about partnership or advocacy?
So when we look at the different NGOs, we also have community-based organizations at the grassroots level. So they really do have deep connections in the community. They are trusted in the community. So they are the ones who would be at the forefront of identifying cases of trafficking. Then we are also looking at the different specialization of the CBOs, the NGOs, looking into those who focus on psychosocial support. There are those who are experts when it comes to reintegration, others when it comes to advocacy. So it's looking into bringing our resources together to be able to provide holistic services for children who are victims of trafficking. Then we're also looking at partnering with government agencies. Essentially, they are the policy makers, the lawmakers. So having them as part of the conversation, it also contributes to prevention as well as prosecution, looking into partnering or working together with the judiciary to look into how then do we prosecute people who have trafficked children. We are also even looking at religious institutions who have access to communities, to platforms that have an impact to communicating to the community, as well as looking into their skills when it comes to awareness raising. HAART Kenya is just one organization, but we do have so many organizations, and given that we have over 50 million people in the country, we are looking into the ripple effect. If HAART is doing this, I touch someone, they touch 100 more. So it's looking into trying to reach as many community members as possible, as well as enhancing advocacy. There is power in having more than one organization that is championing for a particular agenda. So looking into engaging them when it comes to advocacy and raising awareness and fighting for the rights of children. Yes.
Good stuff, good stuff. Now we've talked a lot about stakeholders like partners, the government agencies. How about you and I? What is our role as the community members in terms of protecting children from being at the risk of child trafficking?
So our first mandate is report.
Report where? Where do they report?
The necessary agencies.
Yeah.
If it's the government, make sure you go to the police station, go to the children's offices. Don't just go take videos and post. Do something about it. So that is your first purpose. So as much as everybody wants to check a record and say, okay, this is happening, what have you done about it? Do something. Protect that child. And the same thing, if you have this information, make sure you educate another person that this is actually an abuse, this is what you need to do. In the current laws, you're actually obligated to report. So we have so many victims of trafficking, but very few of them identified because people do not report. So one of the major reasons why we cannot support as many as possible, and also the prevention team cannot go and create awareness in those communities because they don't have the data on the kind of work that is taking place and even the type of crime that is taking place. That's why mine is just report.
Report. And we do have a helpline that is 0780-211-113. Miriam,
Yes.
what can the community do in terms of creating awareness about child trafficking, or rather safeguarding children who are vulnerable to child trafficking?
I think number one is being aware on the risks that children have in our community. So if we have street children in our community, if we have orphaned children, we have refugee children, we are looking into providing more protection services. You do not need to be related to a child to want to have their best interest at heart, as well as questioning some of the opportunities that are within our communities. If somebody wants to provide maybe a training for children, or they want to take children for a camp somewhere, or they want to provide economic opportunities for children, let us research, let us know who these people are. Do they have the proper documentation? Do they have proper child protection guidelines? Or these are just people who want to take advantage of our children? Let us be gatekeepers when it comes to protecting the children that we have. Even looking at the business owners, looking at our demand and supply chain, the resources or the materials that you're producing with, just making sure they're not produced from children who are working in different industries. Even the practices we have at home. Do I want to employ a child? Why do I want to employ a child? You might feel, I am helping this child, I am giving them food, I'm giving them shelter, but at the end of the day, is it in their best interest? So scrutinizing and seeing some of the things that we do individually that also increase the risk of children being trafficked. Even monitoring how our children are accessing things online. Which websites are these? Who are they even talking to? What are they sharing out there? Even to the small things as who is picking my child from school? How does my child get from home to school, from school to home? In the middle, who are they talking to? Who are they playing with? Which adult are they in conversation with? Because the small things that we are able to do are enough to protect children from becoming victims of trafficking.
Great. That is such a fantastic way to wrap up this conversation. Thank you, Winnie. Thank you, Miriam, for joining us today as we talk about the theme for July 30th, which is Leave No Child Behind in the fight against human trafficking. Remember, we are an organization that supports victims of human trafficking, creating also awareness in the communities. So if you would like to engage with us, you can reach us through our helpline. That's 0780-211-113, or visit our website. That's www.heartkenya.org, or our social media platforms. We're on Facebook, X, Instagram, LinkedIn, and TikTok for our Gen Zs. And also we are on YouTube, which is where you can get us. That's all those platforms at HAART Kenya. Thank you so much for joining us today. Let's continue to ensure that we have a society free from human trafficking.